So we would like to simplify the way we're going to animate this barrel. So we're just going to add some additional controls or some additional channel box values to this control to allow us to control the bend and the squash. So I have the control selected, and it looks like I have the whole thing selected. I don't recognize the barrel, the squash handle, the bend handle. I don't have those selected. I have the parent of those things selected. So everything that is a child of it will also light up as green like this as well. So just recognize I only have the control selected right now. And I can go to modify, we're going to say add attribute. And this is going to allow us to add, all of these values here, they're called attributes. And this is the channel box, but we're adding an attribute to that. And so I'm going to do one called bend. And I'm just going to hit add. And I'm going to do one called squash. And I hit OK. And you'll see at the bottom of here now we have bend and squash. And it would be great if everything was automatic and I could just adjust bend and squash and it would work. But right now, those are just variables. These are just numbers that are not connected to anything, right? Like these are just, for all Maya knows, I just want to remember the number 10. And so I put that there as like a note to myself, right? Maya doesn't know what to do with this until we tell it what to do with it. And what we want to do is tell Maya that whenever I change this number, whenever I change this bend number, I want it to change on my bend handle under the bend input. I want it to change curvature. And so we're going to do that with a direct connection. And I'm going to show you two ways to do that. So the first way we're going to do that is with this barrel control selected. I'm going to go to Windows and then General Editor, Connection Editor. And this is, I would say, the older way of doing this. So what this is a direct connection. I want A to drive B exactly, right? And so our output is the thing we want to be the driver, right? And if I scroll down here to the bottom, we will see bend and squash. I want this bend value on my barrel control to drive the curvature on my bend handle. And so that means if this is my output, this is the driver, this side over here is the thing being driven. And you want to be careful not to click this because that will flip them back and forth. I mean, you can, but I don't want to. This direction makes sense. So I need to reload my inputs. I need to reload my inputs by clicking the bend handle. And then if I hit reload right, it will bring the bend handle in here. But actually the thing I need is not listed here. So the thing I really need is actually under the input from the bend handle. So what I need to do is go over here to inputs and click bend 1 and say reload right. And so now you'll see it's bend 1 instead of bend handle. And so the first way we can connect this is to go to bend, and then over here I find curvature and click it. And you'll see when I click curvature here, curvature over here will turn a different color. It'll turn yellow. It also goes back to 0 and it all lines back up. And so that yellow means that something else is controlling it. And the thing that is controlling it is under our barrel control, the bend attribute. And that'll let us bend it back and forth now. So there's another way we could do this connection. And this is a little bit more complicated. You're welcome to do both of them with the connection editor. But I do want to introduce this thing to you just because it comes in handy later. If we go to Windows, we go to Node Editor. The Node Editor is what is really going on behind the scenes with all of the stuff here in our scene. And so if I click this button right here, this will show us both the inputs and the outputs of what I have selected. And for the barrel control, that's going to show us, everything connected to it in some way or another. And it's actually way more complicated than you might think. Right? So for the barrel control, we have the bend and the squash are children of it. So it knows it's connected to it in that way. Right? And we also see this squash is affecting the barrel shape. Right? And so we can actually, and if we click these little lines out to the end, we can expand out and see different attributes for this. And so if I click it 3 times, you'll see that my factor is right there. right? And what I actually want is I want my barrel control the squash to drive factor. And so if you've taken an Unreal class, this is going to seem very familiar to you. I'm just going to click here on this little green dot, drag it to factor, and now the same thing has happened as what happened with the connection editor. So I can close this down, and now our little control here has squash and stretch on it, and bend on it, and they both work to affect our object. One last thing we're going to do to this barrel before we move on. Now that I have these controls on the barrel where I can animate here, I don't necessarily need to see these deformers anymore. Those are what's being controlled, but those are not necessary for me to animate. So what I'm going to do is select them, and I'm going to hit Control H to hide them. And so now it's a little cleaner, and I can see it a little better. I'm also going to go ahead and put the barrel mesh in its own layer, and I will name that barrel layer, and that will allow me to lock the barrel layer by clicking that until it says R. And now when I drag select, it's very easy to make sure I'm selecting the control and not the mesh or either of the controllers. So this should make this much easier for us to animate later. So in the next video, I will do a quick little animation of this now that we have a rig for it.